Hello and welcome to part 2 of the ACRL Health Sciences Interest Group, sponsored webinar series on interactive online learning. My name is Annie Zeidman-Karpinski, and I'm the convener of the Health Sciences Interest Group for this year. I'm joined in moderating the session today by Anna Ferry, who's our incoming convener. So the Health Sciences Interest Group is a place to network, share information, ask questions, and work on special projects and programs relevant to the academic health sciences. You can join our open email list at the link being placed in the chat now. It's a tiny URL. This listserv is not hosted by ACRL and is open to anyone regardless of membership. You can also visit our LibGuide for resources and links to this recording and slides from part 1 in the series in the link I'm placing in, or that Anna is placing in the link in the chat now. And so there'll be, this recording and last recording as well. Before we jump into today's presentations, we want to give everyone here today the chance to register for part 3 in the series happening August 7th at the same time. So 9 Pacific, 10 Mountain, and 11 Central, noon Eastern time. The link to register is going into the chat now and will be shared again at the end of today's session. On August 7th, we'll be hearing from Samantha Harlow at the University of North Carolina, Greensboro on health information literacy and interactive video and accessible asynchronous student-driven search strategies activity. Vera Elwood is going to be from Central Methodist University, will be presenting with Breakout, utilizing a virtual breakout room to teach hands-on medical research skills. And Julia Stumpf and Laura Maynard from Ruth Lilly Medical Library at the Indiana University School of Medicine on updating an in-person elective to online learning. And now for today, we're excited to have 3 presentations. We're going to start with Tessa Whithorn, the online learning librarian and a liaison to the health sciences and nursing at California State University, Dominguez Hills. She's going to be presenting building foundational information literacy skills through a course integrated LibWizard tutorial. Following that will be Paige Scudder, who will be presenting updating an in-person elective to online learning. And finally, Alex Harrington will present on using Padlet for online instruction. Due to time constraints, we may not be able to respond to questions directly, though we encourage a lively conversation in the chat. Please remember to change the to drop-down list in the Zoom chat to say all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see your questions. Live captions are being done either by Google Slides or PowerPoint MS Office 365, which is a great feature if you haven't already tried it. We also want to give a huge thank you to Eloa Sharp and Gina Parsons-Diamond at ACRL for setting up the ACRL Zoom webinar space. Thank you for that. This webinar is being recorded and a link will be sent to all registered attendees following the session. We'll also post a link to this on that LibGuide. So now, without further ado, we'd like to welcome the first presenter, Tessa Whithorn.
Hi, good morning, everyone. If I could share my screen, I think you have to stop sharing first, though, for the settings. Great. All right. So I'll just show my face a little bit to introduce myself. My name is Tessa Whithorn. I'm the online learning librarian at California State University, Dominguez Hills. Thank you so much for joining me today to talk about building foundational information literacy skills through a course-integrated LibWizard tutorial. Before we get started, though, I'd really like to get a sense of everyone's experience with LibWizard, whether you've used it or not. So Anna, if you could run the poll, and then we'll get started.
All right, I am seeing poll numbers coming in. We have about 2/3 have answered. Keep coming. We're almost at 100%, you guys. Can we get there?
You can do it.
I'm impressed.
It also sends a fun note that says that hosts and panelists can't vote, just in case we want to just try to skew the results. So, and I'm mentioning this just in case you haven't used polls yet, just so you have a sense of what we're seeing.
Well, if you want to go ahead and run the results, Anna, this will be a good estimate at least.
Yes.
Great. Well, I'm excited to see that there are lots of folks who are interested in using LibWizard but haven't tried it before. So hopefully you'll get a sense from the example that I'm showing today what you can do with this platform. I'm also glad to see that a lot of people have created at least one before, and some it's totally new to you. So I'll try to cover the basics of what this platform does. SpringShare is a really large vendor in the library world. So I know not everyone may have access to it, but it's a great tool, and a lot of these principles still apply even if you don't have this particular program. So in my presentation today, I'll walk you through the entire design of an interactive tutorial using SpringShare's LibWizard for an introductory health science course that pairs multimodal online instructional materials with learning activities, and I'll describe that a little bit more as well. I'll also address some considerations for making LibWizard web accessible and tips for partnering with instructors so you can really fully integrate this tutorial into the curriculum. So to set the context a little bit for CSUDH, we have a liaison model, and it's a kind of large college for the health science, human services and nursing, that's what it is. So I'm the liaison for health science, which includes options for healthcare management, community health, and radiologic technology. We also have a master's program that's really specialized. It's orthotics and prosthetics. We also have a BS in clinical science and fully online BSN and MSN programs. So prior to the pandemic and everything going online, I did a lot of in-person instruction for the health sciences. And for nursing, I did a lot of online orientations and interactive tutorials for that program as well. But the tutorial I'll be showing you today is for a required introductory course for the health science major. So it's a really large lecture style class with 6 sections typically in the fall with more than 30 students. So even before we were pushed online, this was a really great way to integrate information literacy skills early in the curriculum without having to do a ton of one-shot instruction sessions. So this online interactive tutorial really set the scene and set students up for these foundational, fundamental information literacy skills. I also want to preface this by acknowledging that fully integrated tutorials can take a lot of time. So I'll give you a little sense of how long it took to pilot this tutorial and some of the revisions that we, oh, sorry, I'm just checking the chat about transcripts.
Oh, I'll keep an eye on the chat and then let you know anything you need to respond to at the end.
Okay, great, thank you. So like I was saying, I want to preface this that building relationships with instructors take a lot of time. So I started in my position here in the fall of 2018 and began partnering with health science faculty primarily through in-person instruction. Around the same time, we have a really great information literacy coordinator at CSUDH. So she led an initiative where we did curriculum mapping for different degree programs. And it really helped me get a sense of the health science curriculum and where an interactive tutorial and strategic in-person instruction was really going to be the best way to deliver information literacy concepts for this program. And I'll show you an example of that in just a minute. Kind of around the same time, I started working with a health science faculty member through in-person instruction. He had a lot of sway in the department and was really instrumental in getting all 6 instructors for this introductory GE course on board with assigning the health science HEA 201 tutorial as an assignment for the class. So we were really fortunate to have all 6 instructors on board. So in the fall of 2019, we had 346 students take the tutorial. And then in the fall, again, a few less sections are offered in the spring, so less students took it, but it was still all the sections that offered it. So we had 78 students take the tutorial then. And this gave us some really rich feedback from the tutorial itself that I'll describe later. So we made some modifications that way as well. So to give you a sense of how you can really scaffold information literacy concepts throughout the curriculum, I'll give you a little snippet of my curriculum degree map for the health science major. And if you haven't done this before, I'd really strongly encourage it. If you're new to your position or just haven't done it before, curriculum mapping is a great way to approach your instruction more strategically and scaffold information literacy by increasing higher order skills throughout the program, slowly introducing new concepts and addressing different aspects of the ACRL framework, for example. So in that time of curriculum mapping, I identified HEA 201, Healthcare Systems and Perspectives, for our tutorial. And I aligned one of the course outcomes, which is via technology-based avenues, identify and utilize authoritative sources to maintain health literacy. This was the outcome from the course. And then from there, devise specific learning outcomes for the tutorial itself. So after they take the tutorial, they take this Health Science 201 library tutorial, and they also take a citation tutorial as well. So after both of those tutorials, hopefully students will be able to use library databases and keywords and filters to find scholarly articles related to a topic, describe characteristics of scholarly peer-reviewed sources, and identify tools and conventions for APA citation. These also align with our IL program outcomes, our information literacy program for general education. One thing that was really helpful about this tutorial was that although it was required for all health science majors, it included students from other majors as well. So this was a really great intervention for health science in particular, but also was addressing the information literacy needs of students in other programs as well. And I also connected those to the ACRL frames, searching as strategic exploration and information as value. So I'll just cover briefly the other points in the curriculum to give you a sense of how this is really building foundational skills for students. So since all students in all 6 sections of this course have been taking this tutorial for multiple semesters, by the time they get further in their career, I know that they at least have these foundational skills with searching, understanding peer-reviewed sources, and citation. So this HEA 468 Multicultural Health is another big research intensive course. It also has a really high DF and then withdrawal rate, and is a course that has a lot of transfer students. So this is a great point in the curriculum to reinforce some of the same information literacy concepts around searching and appropriate attribution, but we also have the room to expand these topics and really address scholarship as a conversation. We do different activities in in-person instruction where we use more advanced search strategies, and we talk more in depth about how systems privilege, how library systems and scholarly communication present barriers to some and privilege others. And then by the time they get to the capstone level, we really have more room to look at research as inquiry, and we use a lot of GIS mapping tools to do that. So let's get into LibWizard a little bit, and I'll just give you a quick review if you haven't seen it before. So this is a tutorial platform through SpringShare, and besides already being familiar with LibGuide's suite itself, so I think it's really easy to use, it has some really great advantages in that it's a split screen. So it allows for hands-on searching. You can have directions and questions on the left, and embedded materials like videos, interactive web browsers, and infographics on the right, which I'll show you examples of, as well as other content. It also has some great features for assessment and a certificate of completion that students can download and then upload to Blackboard. And you can customize those certificates as well. So you can include evidence of student learning for instructors to see and grade as well. I also have it set so that students have to get the correct answer to continue. So I do want to say that the assessment, we don't necessarily use it as evidence of student learning because they're still being introduced to a lot of these concepts, but rather we use assessment questions as interactive engagement points to check comprehension, to provide opportunities for students to reflect on their learning experience. And it can really give us a sense for if a question has a bad design, maybe we should include more directions or change aspects about the tutorial to better help students learn. So I'll just run through a few examples of what I'm calling these paired learning activities in LibWizard. So there is, at the end of this presentation, I'll provide a link to a worksheet. So if you're interested in using a similar model, it has the full outline, and you can take the tutorial as well with the link that was shared. You might get an authentication sign-in screen for one particular point that has hands-on searching, but you should still be able to click through and guess and see the directions at least. So I do encourage you to go through and take it. And I have also provided a worksheet that has that outline structure as well that gives examples of the thing on the right, the learning content, and then on the left, the paired learning activity. So how students are engaging with it either through questions, reflection, etc. So this first example shows you the LibWizard platform. You can see on the right, there's an embedded Medline database. And then on the left, we have directions for a guided search. So this is a great way to be, the guide on the side, providing examples of a search and keywords, and then having students type out and try it and practice on their own After the guided search, students also practice with their own keywords and their own topic. So they're coming away from the tutorial just like an in-person session with some sources that they can use for their assignment. There's also other videos that really prepare students to do this ahead of time. So before they actually get into hands-on searching, they watch a really short video on searching in a library database. And the videos in this tutorial, at least, are all videos that I've created myself, but I do sometimes reuse really great videos from other institutions. I don't think you have to necessarily reinvent the wheel for a lot of these tutorials because there are a lot of great videos out there that cover concepts, but at least for searching in databases, I think it's helpful to create your own videos that kind of show students the whole process from getting to the library homepage to databases and describing some of those contextual aspects. This video on searching in a library database also talks about identifying keywords from research questions and searching in a database. So some of the paired learning activities or questions have them look at a research question and then select all that apply to pick out the keywords. There's also another video on peer review, and this is another video that we created ourselves. But there are lots of other great videos out there on peer review. We really wanted a video on peer review in our department, so we collaborated to create a peer review video that talks about not only the process, but some of the critiques of the peer review process. So we talk about blind peer review and some of the disadvantages of that in racial and gender bias, and address some of the alternative modes for scholarly communication, like open peer review, and things like that. So after watching this video, students just reflect with a quick open-ended question, what are some of the pros and cons of the peer review process? So they're understanding peer review from this process-based model and then reflecting on that before they get into looking at some of these scholarly sources. And that video was created in Powtoons. So finally, one of the other learning activities to provide a different mode is an infographic. I use Pictochart for a lot of my infographics. And after they learn about peer review, they look at the structure of a research article in the sciences. So with this infographic, it kind of breaks down the different parts and talks about abstracts, introduction, method, results, and references. And then they kind of match the different parts with different definitions. So like which part of the article could you read first to determine if it meets your research needs? Which part of the article could you read for a comprehensive overview? Which section contains a list of other studies, etc. So this gives you a sense for the really wide variety of materials that you can use in LibWizard, and then the types of questions that you can pair them with to engage students in their learning. So finally, I know if you haven't used LibWizard before, you may have questions about how to make LibWizard accessible, and I do think that you can make it accessible as you can through some of these strategies. Oh, actually, sorry. There we go. So for the CSUDH, the CSU system, to purchase any software programs, we have to provide a volunteer product accessibility template. So if you're not familiar with this, it goes through all the standards in the section 508, standards for web accessibility, and describes how this product either meets or doesn't meet certain criteria for screen readers to be able to read the text of a tutorial and things like mouse clicks. It's really in-depth. I don't know a ton about it, so please feel free to share resources in the chat as well. But it is really helpful to know what the constraints of this platform are, but also that a lot of accessibility standards are how you make something accessible. So for example, if you're including a video in LibWizard, it's important to use videos that have captions that aren't necessarily automatically captioned, but that's one way to make videos accessible in LibWizard. If you're adding infographics, I recommend to create them as accessible PDFs. And if you're interested in that topic, I'm happy to share some more resources later. But I usually create my infographics as accessible PDFs in Adobe Acrobat Pro, and then integrate them as the PDF in LibWizard. And as well as writing clear directions using Writing for the Web practices. And when you're designing visuals and setting up the tutorial itself, it's important to think about other aspects of accessibility like color contrast. So I use this resource, the WebAIM contrast checker, which is really great. So you can compare if you're looking at or creating an infographic, is the background color a high enough contrast to the text so that people with low vision or just others can make sure that it's legible and you're communicating your concepts effectively. There are also some tips that I would recommend. For example, I always use at least 16 font for questions just to make it legible and easy to use. And you can also ask SpringShare for help for a lot of these things. For example, I added a custom border around the embedded search frame to make it easier for students to know where they should hover their mouse to scroll. It's really small things like this that you can improve to make LibWizard more accessible. I know one concern and consideration that a lot of people have for LibWizard is this dreaded HTTP versus HTTPS mixed content error. So if you know what I'm talking about, you might have encountered this frustration. But this just goes to show that you can't embed every interactive browser that you might want into LibWizard, but I don't think that should necessarily stop you from using this as a really great platform to pair those learning activities, right? And in addition to our interactive tutorials, we also have quizzes. So sometimes we just embed a video and then have the questions where students can add reflection. So if you're having technical difficulties with integrating some of your databases, this is still a really great tool to provide students with engagement and assessment. So finally, I'll just conclude with a few tips on partnering with instructors to really fully integrate a course as an assignment in a class. So really find your library ally. Like I mentioned earlier, this wouldn't be possible at all without the faculty member who really got all the other instructors on board and helped lead the design for this curriculum in the course. So if you can identify a faculty member who does do this on your campus, they're a really great person to have on your side. So I also attended a faculty meeting where I went over the tutorial with the instructors and answered any questions they had. And it's just a great opportunity to kind of show them what students will be learning. I also suggest providing the link to these tutorials directly in the learning management system, and that instructors just assign it as points for completion, right? So we're not necessarily grading students on how many questions they got correct or incorrect. They're learning through this experience. I also like to include some of the student responses on their certificate of completion. This is a feature in LibWizard. So for example, in the health science tutorial, it shows their keywords. So instructors can get a sense for what topics students are interested in exploring and some of the skills that they're learning. I also sometimes send a summary of responses from LibWizard reports for course assessment too. So that's kind of all I have, but feel free to take the tutorial and use the worksheet to model some of these structures of pairing online instructional materials with learning activities. All of my materials are also licensed under Creative Commons, so you're welcome to reuse and adapt them with attribution. And if you have any questions at all, please feel free to email me. I love getting questions about LibWizard, so I'm happy to chat with you more. And if there's time for questions at the end, I'm happy to address those as well.
Okay, we've had folks are really excited about the way you created these tutorials, and I've been itching to send a message to my coworkers myself saying, you should see what she's done here. So I think everyone, there are many other people who are in my same boat. Thank you so much for that. Are there other questions that we have at this time? Okay. Hopefully we'll have a few minutes at the end, and then certainly there'll be a chance for you to connect by email as well. Okay, so thank you again, Tessa, it's wonderful. Now we'll be hearing from Paige Scudder. She's a research and education librarian for the Dartmouth Biomedical Libraries, and she is going to talk about updating an in-person elective to online learning. Thank you, Paige.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Paige Scudder, and I'm one of the research and education librarians for the Dartmouth College Biomedical Libraries. I have, unfortunately, very low Wi-Fi bandwidth, so I'm not going to share my video with you guys. Just a little bit more background on me. In addition to my MLS, I also have a degree in education, And I'm always very excited when I'm able to exercise tools within that toolbox. One of my personal favorite techniques to employ is the flipped classroom, where students complete readings and watch videos before coming into the classroom to engage in the application of material. As I undertook this project, it was very important to me that the course be transitioned into a sustainable version of the flipped classroom for students and librarians alike. For both of our librarians and our students, this meant taking a look at where key touch points existed within the content already. The other thing I wanted to mention before I get started is this project was pre-COVID. So there hasn't really been anything within this project that's been influenced by the transition to being completely remote. So the next thing I want to go over is just a brief history of our electives so that you have some context to what I did. The EBM elective came into being when a fourth-year medical student suggested that there was both a need and an interest in one. The biomedical librarians were already participating in a 3-day conference with the psychiatry department and saw a chance to expand on their existing content. The elective began taking students in 2012, starting with the student that suggested we create one. But it really kicked off in 2013, and then just a little bit more context on some general details of the elective. For 1 credit, students were expected to meet with a librarian for about 2 hours every day of 1 week, so about 10 hours total, and then the remaining 30 hours were expected to be done on their own, completing assignments. Due to medical students taking electives in their 3rd and 4th years, they typically need to fit them in as they travel for their clerkships. So this means that the elective was limited to students who could be physically at our our hospital library location for about a week. Our elective ran this way until 2017, serving roughly 10 students per year. So we're going to fast forward now to that 2017 school year. The elective was moved online and was bumped from 1 credit hour to 2. This meant 2 things. The first is that a 2nd week was added where students designed their own curriculum. They either focused on building on something we discussed in the 1st week, or they chose a research topic of their choosing. The second thing that this meant is that students who were not physically near the library could now take the elective. The combination of these 2 things, we're not sure which mattered more to students, but it did lead to a steady uptick in participants. Another important thing to note at this point is that the transition from in-person to online did not affect the content of the course. So if you were a student enrolled in this course in 2012, the content is very much the same as if you enrolled in it in 2017. The difference being you would be emailed an equivalent of a module by a librarian who would expect you to complete it before you meet with them for an hour on Zoom. Most of the time, these meetings were one-on-one to accommodate student schedules, a task made more difficult by more and more students electing to take the elective while they were interviewing for residency. The elective became more time consuming for the librarian, who went from coordinating a class-like structure to coordinating a librarian-driven independent study. To accommodate this, what we did is reduce the number of students that any one librarian was working with at a time to a maximum of 2 students. So after 2 years of conducting the elective via email, we decided it was time to transition the elective to a more sustainable platform. One of the primary goals of this project was to reduce librarian burden without increasing student burden. It was very important to us that we keep meeting with students as often as possible, as it provided a very personalized touch, and it provided students with the opportunity to ask questions. True, meeting one-on-one with students every day is challenging, but we just weren't ready to give that up. It's also important to note here that the decision was made to drop the 2nd week of the elective and to bring it back down to a credit value of 1. So with these things in mind, we agreed that there needed to be a balance of written and verbal feedback so that each created valuable learning opportunities for students, shifting the librarian-driven learning to a student-driven environment. Additionally, this meant that we needed to move away from emailing modules towards a system that takes advantage of a learning management system, which in our case is Canvas. The next goal of this project was to update existing material whenever possible. For example, the course objectives hadn't been updated since creation. While they were good objectives, the course was old enough to require both an updating and streamlining of the existing objectives to better reflect the material. Another thing that was worth looking into was the readings that students were using to learn about study designs. Again, there's nothing wrong with a randomized control trial from 2007. This was just an opportunity to update materials. There it goes. So the first step in this process was creating a Google document for each module where I could update learning objectives and organize any content that would be put within the model or module. One of the reasons that I created a Google Doc instead of a Word document or a spreadsheet was the ability to edit existing content in the form of suggestions. From here, I could then email a link out to my fellow librarians at Dartmouth, and they could leave comments while comparing the suggested content to the original still in place. The link on the slide here is a link directly out to one of my Google Docs that you can take a look at and see what formatting worked well for me. During this step, I focused on updating existing readings as well as determining what content would benefit from a reading versus a video versus a librarian meeting to explain and answer specific questions. While I made note of existing assignments during this step, my focus was more on what we wanted students to take away from the module and what was needed to support that learning. The second step in this process was outlining the material that would need to be covered in recorded videos, and then taking the time to create those videos. About 2 years ago now, I took an interest in using online tutorials to improve access to library workshops. Since then, I've created videos covering material from citation management all the way through to an introduction to programming with Python. Reviewing the literature over time, I found that there are conflicting views on what best practices really are. For example, in a study that compared screencasts to standard HTML web pages, 21% of students did better on post-tests after viewing an HTML page with screenshots. The idea is that standard web pages are easier to skim and allow students to jump around from section to section as needed. However, a few years later, another study said that students benefit more from static text and image videos. Many studies have quoted similar lines like this one, which is students prefer video tutorials because they don't have to move. This same article provided some good suggestions that tended to be consistent across other articles that I looked at, which is create videos that are task and concept based whenever possible, use chunking, keep your videos linear, and use highlighting or animation to draw the viewer's eye to what you're talking about. Another best practice that came up a few times across the literature was to provide viewers with subtitles because it would provide an additional entry point into the material. This is a very wordy way of saying you cannot make everyone happy, but there are best practices that you can use when you're transitioning lectures into a video format. For example, it may be best practice to chunk material, but the golden rule of the 10-minute video seems to be just a number that's generally agreed upon. So if you need a 20-minute video to chunk your material because there is no natural breaking point, that's fine. If you need 30, that's also fine. One of the programs that I work with have students watch hour-long videos where they don't chunk the material at all, and they actually put the ownership on students to pause the video when they need a break. Personally, I aim to stay closer to that 10-minute mark because it takes into account users who have less bandwidth. This is something that you still need to think about when rural internet feels like dial-up, and with students don't have the mental stamina to sit through very long videos. This is a very roundabout way of me saying that I hope one of the things that comes out of our forced transition to online learning is more studies that have less contradictions. In the end, I created a total of 5 videos for this course. I've linked out to both of them on this slide. Two videos were created on evidence-based medicine, which focus on asking clinical questions and study designs, as well as 3 for PubMed, starting with breaking down a question and then all the way through to translating that question into researchable parts that can go directly into PubMed. One thing to note here is I also used a couple of videos that I did not create. For starters, I found a couple excellent videos that discussed nuances of topics that I was not prepared to get into. And probably more importantly, there was no reason for me to recreate an already fantastic video that someone else had made publicly available. This is something to consider if you're about to take on a similar project. If you're not saying something different, it may be worth using an existing video or existing content. At this point in the presentation, I just want to take a moment to mention a few types of software that you could use to record a screencast. I use Camtasia, I like it. Other paid options include Adobe Captivate and Telestream. All three of these offer free trials, so you can give them a go, feel them out, and decide what works best for you. There are also a couple of free options, including Jing and Screener, and then anyone who has Zoom, you can use Zoom to record your screencasts as well. As we've transitioned to a remote working environment, I've done a few trainings with video captioning software and found that the following advice seems to be helpful for anyone who is just starting out. The first thing that I recommend when undertaking video recording is to have a plan, but also have the willingness to re-record entire videos from scratch. If you feel like something didn't work out right or you just didn't like it, there's nothing wrong with starting over, and you may find better ideas come to you in the middle of editing a tutorial. And that's okay. You have the power to restart at any point in this process. You also, and I think this is equally important to keep in mind, you have the power to say, it's good enough. That edit that you inserted into the middle of your tutorial is slightly quieter than the rest of the tutorial. You know what, it's still audible, it's still articulate and to the point, that's good enough. In my experience, we hold ourselves to very high standards, and that's fantastic. It's what makes us the amazing librarians that we are. But remember that you're human, and these tutorials are going to have human touches. Decide what you're comfortable with as good enough, and then try to stick to it. If you don't, a project like this will quickly become a lot more daunting as well as discouraging. Another point of advice that I want to give is to consider the background noise that will appear in your tutorial. This is not the part where I say you need to do your recording in a quiet room with the door closed saying, shh, recording in process. This is the part where I tell you that my recordings were absolutely affected by COVID because I was recording them from home without the headset that I use when I'm in the office. The headset that I have at home created a different sound quality and therefore picked up noises that my other headset doesn't. So know what little sounds fall into your that's good enough category and which ones make you want to pull your hair out when you've done your best to avoid them and they show up in yet another recording. Next, scripts are helpful in focusing you and kind of forcing you to stay focused, but they can also save you a lot of time. If you have a script and you stick to it, you can very easily convert your script into subtitles. We live in a world that demands information be accessible to all types of individuals, but as a former teacher, I've come to learn that interventions for one group can actually benefit everyone. So maybe they have difficulty hearing, maybe I didn't speak as well as I could have. Maybe someone is trying to watch the video in an airport and they can't listen to your audio. Personally, I find subtitles force me to focus on what's being said. So creating videos that are accessible makes them more watchable for everyone. And I highly encourage you to add subtitles as a step in your videos. It might even put you ahead of the curve if your university is slowly looking for ways to improve their accessibility. Other things to consider that we've done kind of beyond these video creations is providing handouts of your slides and just putting them right on your learning management system. Couple more tips: know your software and make it work for you. For example, my mic wasn't doing a good job at picking up my voice, so I told Camtasia to make it louder by increasing the volume within the mic settings. Most systems have something like this, so just know what you can do without shouting at your computer. The final piece of advice that I can give you on this process is to know yourself. So know how long you can record before your tongue decides to start slurring your sentences into a single word, or until your brain begins to replace words with similar ones, and decide to stop recording when that starts to happen. Know how long you can stare at a computer and make edits to your tutorial, accept that you're going to listen to the sound of your voice and maybe grow to like it. But also know when you can't listen to it anymore. This process might not be fun for everyone, but it shouldn't be miserable either. For example, if I'm lucky, I can record and edit 3 videos in one day, but that doesn't mean that I can do it every single time. So the third step in this process was requesting a Canvas page for our course. Geisel, our School of Medicine, has a template that all courses created must use. So once we had the course, it would then just be a matter of importing the material into their formatting. It sounds so simple when phrased that way, and while it more or less was, this step was more time consuming than I initially anticipated. On the one hand, I was able to copy and paste the general formatting that I had set up for myself within Google Docs directly into Canvas. On the other hand, I needed to create pages for every module and assignments for every activity that we wanted students to undertake. In the interest of time, I'm happy to answer questions on this step, but I'm not going to go into it in any further detail because most of the work was done outside of Canvas and then plugged into their system. This brings us to step 4, transitioning assignments. As I mentioned earlier in this presentation, all of the assignments that students were working on were being emailed out to them and then discussed in one-on-one meetings. This meant that feedback from student to student varied and that there was the possibility you may discuss something with one student and never broach that topic with another student. Now that we're using Canvas, it was time to look into the tools that were provided to us while assessing which assignments could be added within their platform. Assignments transitioned into 2 different forms. The first was an ungraded quiz that students could take multiple times. In one of these quizzes, students identify study designs after reading abstracts. If a study design is incorrectly identified, Canvas is set up to tell them why a study design is incorrect. This provides them with relevant feedback after they complete their quiz, and then from there they can decide whether or not it makes sense or whether or not they want to try again. The next form that assignments transitioned to was what Canvas calls actual assignments. From here, activities will be downloaded in the form of a Word document. Students will then modify the document and upload it back into Canvas for feedback. Librarians can then review the assignments and provide that feedback directly on the document rather than in a separate email. The final transition that happened was done outside of Canvas tools for something we call a teachback. Traditionally, students would choose a topic they learned about within one of the modules, and they would then go off and learn about it on their own and provide about a 5-minute teachback in their next meeting. In the interest of making this assignment more flexible, students now have the option to record their teachback, write a paragraph, or conduct their teachback in person. There we go. This brings us to our final step, identifying librarian touchpoints. One of the reasons that we enjoy teaching this elective so much is we're able to work with students and discuss various parts of EBM with them. We needed to find a way to flip the classroom so that our discussions could become meatier while also reducing the number of times that we needed to meet. With these things in mind, we reduced the number of times students were required to meet with a librarian from daily to 3 times. The first meeting has been designed to orient students to the course. The second meeting is on day 3, where students will demo PubMed and have a chance to ask questions on the material up to that point. The final meeting is on the last day of the course, or day 5, where students will discuss their final assignments. We have had a couple of students work through the new format as a soft launch, but we are not planning on transitioning completely until this fall. At this time, we have 6 students signed up and anticipate more signing up as they learn about the increased flexibility. We're also planning on launching a systematic review elective this fall and have applied many of the techniques that we've just discussed to it. As with anything, it's important to keep in mind that this elective is something that will continue to evolve the longer we teach it and receive feedback from our students. And if we have time for questions, I'd be happy to take them now.
Paige, we have a couple of questions, but we really don't have time. I'm so sorry, but I do hope that folks who have questions will contact you directly.
Sure, and I'll try to respond to them in the chat if I can.
Fantastic, thank you so much. That was wonderful. So we now turn to Alex Harrington, the Access Services and Instruction Librarian at Penn State's Harrell Health Services Library in Hershey, Pennsylvania, to talk about Padlet for online instruction. Take it away, Alex.
Thank you. Hang on, pull that up. Okay. So I'm Alex Harrington. I'm going to talk to you about the tool called Padlet for online instruction. And actually my examples are kind of across the board. There's a couple, let me turn my video so everybody can see my beautiful smiling face. There you go. So there's a couple that you could use in an office setting, some that you could use in any classroom, some that are a little more specific to the type of project or activity. So I'll start with what Padlet is. Padlet is a collaboration tool. It can do lots of different types of collaboration, so I try to reflect those in my examples as well. And they're going to be interactive, so you guys can play with the tool a little bit as users. It is browser-based. There are Padlet apps for both Apple and Android, last time I checked, but for online instruction, it feels like browser-based makes more sense because you're already in a browser. Padlet allows you to share text, image, video, audio, all sorts of things, and when you use it, you'll see the types of things you can attach. You can both post those things or attach file types. So if you have a PDF you want to share, you can do that. It updates live and it auto-saves, so it works very well for both synchronous and asynchronous purposes. As a user who is creating the content, the boards, you can customize the links, you can customize templates, backgrounds, themes, and I'll point out in the first example what I set up myself and what is just them. My favorite part about using it for live classroom and online classroom settings is that it doesn't require any registration on the part of the participant. You don't have to be logged into anything. You don't have to create an account of any kind. You can just use it and then walk away and never use it again or come back to it 100 times. And also it's free, the magic word, right? So let's take a look at the first example, and Anna's going to share the links to these in the chat for me. Thank you, Anna. But this is my first example Padlet. This is something I came up with for sort of an in the office kind of setting or across an entire department. As I imagine is happening at many places, Penn State Health is asking what kind of diversity training and opportunities we're interested in. So this just seemed to make sense to me. And I'm going to go to it myself, and feel free to go ahead and post answers if you aren't already. Let's take a look. Awesome, good. So this is a fairly standard template. It's either wall or grid. I can't remember which one I set it up to be. I want to say it's grid because it's putting all of your boxes in tidy little rows and columns once we get enough. The things that I customized, obviously the URL is unique to me. Alex Harrington, all one word, is my username, and I just named this board diversity. The background is something from their library of photos. They have photos, solid colors, patterns, etc. They have a whole library of emojis that you can put up at the top corner. I've just picked one that fit. You can leave it off entirely if you want to. Obviously, the title and description are up to you as well. Anybody who has not sorted out how to go ahead and post or just wants a tutorial real quick, the little plus sign in the bottom right, you click on that, it lets you create a box, and once you've inserted something in that box, whether it's an audio file or a video file or a screenshot or text, then if you click away from the box, it pops up right there. So looks like a lot of you have sorted it. Oh, somebody did a photo or an image, thank you. There is also a Google option, and I'm not going to try to do this while all the other boxes are popping up, but it has a little thing that looks like a magnifying glass with a little world inside of it. You can Google directly from the Padlet screen instead of trying to upload an image that you've saved somewhere else, just to kind of skip a couple of steps, which I find convenient. Let's see. Go back to these. All right. There will be more examples. Feel free to keep adding to that one, playing with it. So this diversity training brainstorming exercise is also a good asynchronous example. Obviously, it can work synchronously because you guys are posting as we watch, but you could send out a link via email and check the answers later. You can bring it up at a meeting or in a class and do it the next time you meet and review the answers together. So this is something I've seen in, say, an English class where I used to work at a community college, so we used Padlet a lot there. But they would brainstorm something and then come back to it the next class and see if anybody had added new answers and come back to the discussion from where they stopped off. Since Padlets update immediately and they also autosave, they can be used synchronously like we just did. You can demonstrate a tool and have people post examples after they try it out on their own. So for example, here's the database, try it out, post a link to an article that you found that matches these criteria I give you, because you can put links in the box as well. Or have the students do an activity of any kind, really, and once you're done with it, post a discussion question for the class, and you can come back to the Padlet at the end. And I like the trick of secretly having the Padlet open and watching things as they occur, just to see what's going on in it, so you can see them as they're coming in and sort of prepare for that. Or another trick is to have separate Padlet boards for each group and do small group activities. And that can be either in the class synchronously, sorry, or it can be an asynchronous thing where you say, here's your group's board, go work on it together, we'll come back to it. And that's actually what my next example will be. So let's take a look at that. This one, you're not gonna get the link for because I have it moderated, just as an example of how that works. So even if you did go to it, you'll see I'm not logged in because I wanted to make this work correctly. There's no little plus sign down here. I can't add to it because I'm not logged in as me or another qualified user. This is an example that I threw together based on a real thing. I'm actually working on this systematic review right now with a handful of people, the research team, and this template is called Shelf. It creates columns of boxes instead of that grid like you saw before. So you can add the little boxes in there. You can add all the same things that you could do before: audio, video, text, photo, anything. I even created a key over here on the right-hand side so that I can color code it, because I'm one of those people who color codes everything. But you can edit these, you can change them, and everybody who I give access to with my moderation can make changes to this. So I could invite somebody else from the research team to come in and update it and say, oh, actually, we're partway through screening, let me include how many we've done, or whatever. Let's see. So that would be something that works for a small group. Something that requires moderation, obviously only the people who get access can use it. The diversity training brainstorm could be anywhere from 5 people to how many participants are in here? 200 some. So it can be used for a much larger group as well. But the systematic review Padlet I would see as something like organizing small group activities in class or for outside of class for group projects. And then that way you have access to it as well. You can see if they're making progress, if they're sharing things. And if you do require them to register for a Padlet account, you can see who's doing what. But like I said, that's not necessary. They don't have to do that. They'll just all show up as anonymous if they don't do that. Okay, here's another example that you can participate in. And I think this one's really fun only because I've never used it for a real class, but I would really love the opportunity to do so one day. So you can go ahead and go there. If you're using a mouse with a scroll wheel, that's an easy way to scroll out of the map when you get there. Otherwise, down here in the bottom right, you should see a plus sign and a minus sign for zooming in and out. So I can see that some people are already posting their answers. This is one I came up with for a specific project, and obviously not a medical thing. But like I said, I'm doing some pretty general examples here. So a geography project where everybody gets to choose a different country. And this is something that would probably work asynchronously because, as you can see, they're popping up all over the place. I realized as I was testing this to make sure everything worked properly for this presentation, you can get really granular. So in theory, you could use it for where do we want to have the holiday party this December? And you can pick specific restaurants or locations in your city. So it doesn't have to be a whole country or a whole state or anything like that. So all over the world, I love it. I could just sit and watch this for hours, but obviously we don't have time for that. So that's a different template that doesn't really call for the text box sort of thing, but it provides a different way of collecting information. So some of the purposes I see for Padlet would be brainstorming, sort of like the diversity training one, collaboration like the research one, and feedback, which applies to pretty much all of them. And I've listed all of the templates here that are available. Grid and wall are like the first one, the diversity one. The only difference is that grid puts it in a tidy set of rows and columns, and wall sort of just splatters it wherever it goes. Wall can be dangerous because sometimes they'll get posted on top of each other, so you have to move them aside to make sure that they're not obscuring anybody else's responses. Map obviously is the geography one that we just looked at. Timeline is, it'll put a horizontal line across the screen, and then your answers can be put anywhere along that line, and it'll rearrange them if there's too many close together. Shelf is like the research one. It's the neat, tidy columns, and you can insert a header for each one. Stream looks a lot like a Facebook feed or a Twitter feed. It just does one stacked on top of the other. And you can ask it to put the most recent response either at the top or the bottom, and then it just streams. And back channel, I've included a screenshot of one because I think that would be an absolute disaster to have 200 people trying to use all at once. But it looks exactly like a chat window. And you can see here, I've technically logged out and talked to myself as anonymous. But you can insert, again, all the same things that you can put on the regular wall: photo, link. I've uploaded a PowerPoint file, I think, in this one. So, and then down at the bottom is the little chat box for you to type in. So no tool is perfect, we all know that. Padlet's no exception. There are limitations. The free user or the free creator account only allows you to have 5 active Padlets at once. Sort of an accidental workaround that I have. I still have my account attached to my personal email that I made at my old job, and I have a current one that is attached to my Penn State email. And also you can participate in as many as you want. So you don't have to be the owner of the Padlet to participate. Obviously, you guys all participated in mine. So if you're working with a group and you need 6 Padlets, somebody else can make one of them. You can make 5 or split it 3 and 3, whatever. The only way to lock down your answers is to add moderation. Otherwise, anyone who has access to the link can post to it. I don't see this being a problem for a classroom setting, but the links in this presentation are going to be out there. So I will probably add moderation in a couple days, so you can still play with them if you want to. But if you find that you have a Padlet that's being abused, whatever the Padlet equivalent of Zoom bombing is, I guess Padlet bombing, you can very easily change the URL. You can change all of the settings to any URL at any given, or any Padlet at any given time. So if you want to change the background, do it. It doesn't affect any of the answers. Same goes for the URL. In some of the templates, it's easy to lose track of posts that fall off the bottom of the screen, especially that streaming one. So if you have a lot of responses, I would not recommend certain templates. And as far as accessibility goes, I do not own or have access to a screen reader, so I can't test it, but I'm guessing that it might have some trouble with screen readers reading all of the information, except maybe in the grid format or the stream format. So I know we're really close to the time, we're at the time, but this is the last example I have. You're welcome to add to it, read it, use it. This is a way for everyone to brainstorm ways that they might use Padlet in an online setting or an offline setting. I actually preloaded it with one example from my previous job where we did scavenger hunts in person. The students would carry around iPads and you can read it there. But if you have new ideas, if you've used Padlet before for something like this, please share your experience, share your ideas, build off of each other's ideas. And there's my email address. If anybody has questions, I'm happy to talk about Padlet and online instruction, all of the other things.
Thank you, Alex, and I'm sorry we had so much to say. We've run out of time. We do have about 10 minutes at the for you to answer additional live questions, but I know that some people will have to go have other meetings. So as we conclude thank you again. As we conclude part 2 of the HSIG Interactive Online Learning Webinar Series, we hope you enjoyed it as much as I have, and I hope you'll join us again on August 7th at the same time. So that's 9 Pacific, 10 Mountain, 11 Central, and noon Eastern for the Interactive Online Learning Series. We have a link to register in the chat, and everyone who's registered should get something linking to this recording, and we'll also have it on our LibGuide as well. Everyone enjoy your weekends, and we hope to see you again on August 7th. If you have time to stay for a few minutes, please do. And I will be monitoring the chat to see if there are additional, we'll put a link to the LibGuide again. It's the HSIG LibGuide as well. Hopefully you'll get to see it. And we're getting lots of thank yous and things like that. Paige, I think one of the questions that came up a lot was just where you had the content and whether or not it was in your LMS or if it was if it was online for folks to use. And I think also, did students get CE credit for it? Maybe if it was the students, maybe it was for us. So.
Yeah, so this course is available through the med student course catalog. So you have to officially register it. From there, you're put on a wait list. And then my supervisor actually goes through and assigns students to librarians as well as to the Canvas course. So it is an official accredited course, which is really nice. That being said, all of the videos are currently stored on TechSmith Relay as a bit of a repository. And our mentality is, well, we made them, so we should use them. If anyone asks for them, we're very happy to send them out. Otherwise, they exist within LibGuides, or sometimes faculty ask for them directly, and we give them, whether it's the embed code or the link, whatever works best for them. And I did, sorry about, that didn't used to be behind a password wall, so I did send Anna the links. And I did throw them in the chat, so sorry about that.
Yeah, and we'll definitely put them on the HSIG LibGuide. Tessa, there was a question about how long it took you to create your tutorials. Do you have an answer for that?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to address that. It really is kind of building materials over time. So I'll make the caveat that, if you have a lot of videos already, if you have infographics already, building out those tutorials are a lot quicker, usually around maybe like 2 or 3 hours, but the video creation is really what takes a long time. So if you're adding that into your estimate, I would say maybe 10 hours. It really just depends, but does that give you a sense?
Yeah, I think it's also good to remember too that this can be an ongoing project. You can do pieces of it and sort of chip away at it.
Absolutely, yeah.
One thing I didn't hear anyone say that I sort of learned how to use a little bit more is that you can record in PowerPoint as well. The other part that I learned about PowerPoint, though, is that the interface for recording in PowerPoint is really different for a Mac and a PC, and the PCs is much better. So Tessa, there's a question about tablet mobile versions of tutorials, and yeah, and if you thought of any ways to handle that.
Yeah, so the welcome screen that is included on all of our tutorials does ask that students use a desktop or laptop computer. That is really unfortunate, I think, especially since we know that mobile-based students are using mobile more and more for their learning experiences. But we do kind of just say in the intro screen, the experience is better on a desktop or a laptop. And we include in the end of our tutorials opportunities for feedback. So students ask, one thing they learned or one thing that could be changed or improved. So sometimes we get some technical errors reported that way, but I think overall students read the welcome message and use a device that works best. So I'm not familiar with that particular error with EBSCO, but it's worked well so far.
And then Alex, a question for you for the Padlets. Do you use it during class or before class or after class? Do you use it with Zoom or instead of Zoom?
All of the above, actually. I would use it with Zoom instead of unless you wanted to send it out in post it in an LMS or link to it in an email, or it would depend on the group you're working with and how you want to use it, really. But I like the idea of using it in Zoom because then you can pull it up kind of like I did, and everybody can look at it together if you're doing something synchronous. But any of those would work depending on your activity and why you want to be using it.
Yeah, and somebody said that they put it in their LibGuide, which I hadn't thought about doing.
Oh, that's great.
I know, that's very cool. Okay. Are there other questions that folks have that haven't been addressed live? There's lots of discussion about I was looking off to see sort of the discussion about frames and how frustrating that is. Yeah, these are wonderful presentations. I'm not seeing any other questions that make sense to that haven't been answered or make sense to answer here now. So I think we can say goodbye to everyone. Thank you so much for staying. We had over 240 people at one point, and over half of them stayed through this after this. I think just showing how much how much value this brings to the community. We had talked about this in the preparation, but we had the HSIG had put out a call for people to do presentations, and we had such great responses and so many things that looked interesting that we modified what we were doing so that everyone had a chance to practice. So part of what we were doing today for the folks who were remaining is giving presenters a chance to practice presenting in this format. You all just, again, knocked it out of the park. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
So again, enjoy your weekends, and we hope to see you again August 7th, which is 2 Fridays from now.
Great, thank you very much, Alex.